cushion I can put under. That's too spongy. Good evening. We're in a different location tonight because the weather is changing, and we when we use the yogastan, which is where we've usually been, as the weather gets colder, we have to build a fire. And it's a huge building to heat. So we find another spot for during the cold weather. So welcome to everyone. And I am happy that there were some questions that came our way. And it's never too late. You can also ask questions during this presentation, during this discussion. And so, as Garel said, don't hesitate, because whatever we're discussing, that may bring up some additional questions, and that fills out and enriches the whole thing. So don't hold back. So we have the first question was about, I would like, can I read it? Or should you read you the question, which is Julie's. Thank you, Julie. Yeah. So Julie said, we're getting ready, she's in one of Arabella's classes, and they're getting ready to do the cilantro detox as described in Radical Healing. And she was interested in more information about why is cilantro effective and how it works. And so you can go back to the screen. So I have to confess, well, no, I don't know that I want to confess. I have to explain that, you know, our tendency in our Western medicine and science is to ask, well, what is the active ingredient in cilantro that detoxes metals? And there may be some thinking on that. I mean, there may be ideas about that, but actually, I think we're beginning to move into a phase of healing work where we realize that the plant is, it's an intact, complete entity that has certain properties that can't be reduced to just one compound or two compounds in the plant. That thinking actually is probably only in the last 50, 75 years that we've approached plants that way to know what is the active ingredient. Well, the active ingredient might not be active if it's taken out of the plant, but this is partly a result of the pharmaceutical industry, which wants to patent whatever it uses so it can have a monopoly on it, and so that it can raise the price higher and so forth. So they kind of spearheaded this idea of there is the active ingredient. So what a pharmaceutical company will do is identify the active ingredient and then put some little addition onto the molecule so it's unique and not natural, and then they can patent it. So that has dominated thinking about botanical medicine. But the old-fashioned doctors, and of whom I am one, and the homeopaths and the herbalists were like, no, 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 you don't understand. There are other things in the plant that helps that active ingredient do its job better. And so when you break it apart, you lose some of the power of what the plant can do. So, so that becomes the issue here, that we know that there's something about the nature of the cilantro leaf that allows it to encourage, or it helps with the removal of toxic substances from the body. Not all toxic substances, but especially metals. And so we use it that way in the whole plant. I recommend usually that people take a quarter of a cup of packed cilantro, and in radical healing, these directions are given, and mix it with something like freshly squeezed orange juice. My favorite was to put the hulls, the skins of the grapes. What are they called? We call them scuppernons or bullaces here, but they are, somebody help me, what's the general classification of those grapes that grow in the South? Anyway.
Muscadine. Muscadine? Muscadine?
Yeah, muscadine, thank you. Muscadine grapes. And throw those in and blend up the whole thing really well, and then drink that. It's just absolutely delicious. And it has an amazing detox effect. So this is the time of year that you can do that. So take advantage of muscadines if you find them in the store. Usually in the north, you can find them a little bit in the store. In the south, they're more common. And a lot of people just have them growing in the yard. We have them growing outside the front door. They're very rich in resveratrol. So it may be the resveratrol that helps in the grape peels, that helps it work better. So yes, this is, there's so much to say about detox, and it's such an important topic at this point in time because our environment is so full of toxic chemicals. So we all need to be doing detox. Thank you, Arabella, for leading your class in detoxification, because we need it. Everybody needs it. Everybody needs it. If you live and breathe and eat food and drink water in this environment that we've created, you need to regularly do detox. And if you don't, the effects of those toxic substances in your body are cumulative. And so it's just like, take a bath, well, why would you take a bath? I don't do anything that gets me dirty. Well, yeah, but we live in the world and we need to clean. My teacher, Swami Ravi, said, you people have to learn to clean yourselves. And everybody was kind of indignant, like, well, I take a shower every day. But what he was talking about is clean the inside of your body. And the yogis had all these elaborate techniques for cleaning the body, and they didn't even have chemical pollution. So we have more sophisticated techniques because we have more serious and complex toxicity in our bodies. And so I'm glad this topic came up, because I think it's something that I'm always trying to get people to be aware of, because most people aren't aware of it and nobody talks about it. Very few people talk about it, I should say. And so, no one wants to think about it. It's like, sweep it under the rug. Well, the rug is your connective tissue, and it all gets stuffed in the connective tissue, where it interferes with very important metabolic functions that need to happen in the connective tissue in the body. So I won't rant any longer on that, but with the slightest provocation, I'll do it again. So it'd be easy to just go ahead and start doing a detox. Okay, so the other question that Julie had was, when we breathe in meditation, we do so with the mouth closed. Why do some meditations led by others breathe in and out with the mouth? Okay. And that's an interesting question, and obviously important. It has a different effect metabolically. For instance, we're just having a little technical thing here. Okay. I used to use a technique for people with high blood pressure where they inhaled through the nose and exhaled through the mouth. Just regular breathing, but you just lie there and you lie or sit, and you inhale through the, and within a few minutes, it brings the blood pressure down like 20 points at least. And patients were really excited about that. Like, wow, if I feel my blood pressure or take my blood pressure is too high, I know how to bring it down. But that's the difference between breathing in and out through the nose or in and out through the mouth. In through the nose and out through the mouth releases tension in the arteries and everywhere. Whereas if you breathe in the mouth and out the nose, you're like increasing tension. So there's very significant differences between mouth and nose. And part of that is due to the fact that the nose is a complex organ, and inside the nose are these surfaces that are on a sort of shell-like curved structures that are called turbinates. Turbinates is because they have something to do with the kind of the way the air flows, creating a certain kind of aerodynamic effect inside the nostrils. And those turbinates are covered in a tissue that is erectile tissue. The only place you have erectile tissue besides the nipples and the genitals is inside the nose. And so when the air touches those surfaces, it elicits nerve impulses that run through the body. And different regions of the lining of the nose are connected to different organs in the body. And so in a way, that breath touching the surfaces and generating those impulses coordinate the action of the internal organs so that they work together harmoniously. And where the air strikes will be dependent to some extent on whether the tissue is swollen in that area or has shrunk in that area. And that is operating on a cycle called the nasal cycle. So that you inhale through one nostril and exhale for 2 or 3 hours, and then it switches to the other side, and that happens all day long. That also has to do with the consciousness and the brain, so that you're turning on the left hemisphere or you're turning on the right hemisphere, and that will affect how you think about things and what you do. Well, in meditation, of course, we want to equalize the flow of the breath through the nostrils, because that is sushumna, and that is the central channel, and that facilitates meditation. So when you're breathing through the nose, you can regulate that more easily, and that will bring you into a meditative state. So, if you think this sounds complicated, I'm only telling you a very small part of it. It's extremely complicated, because the way the air moves through each nostril according to the time of day and the season and the phase of the moon and everything else determines a lot about where your consciousness, where you can go in your consciousness, and what you are able to do with your mind. So yeah, and Julie, actually, one of the great practices that we've mentioned, I think in some evening, maybe you weren't here, but is doing the alternate nostril breathing for a little bit at the beginning of meditation, because that does help establish the equal flow between the nostrils. And it also kind of, that is regulating so many functions in the body and bringing them into harmony and relaxing them. So breath is this very intricate, subtle process that lies at the heart of many of the disciplines of yoga and Tantra and so forth. So and when we breathe through the mouth, we kind of bypass all of that. When I was a kid, I had some sort of sinus condition, chronic thing, so I couldn't often breathe through my nose. And I found that when I went to take an exam, if I couldn't breathe through my nose, I couldn't think clearly. So the ENT doctor gave me these nose drops. And I would put the nose drops in, and then for like an hour I could breathe. And then you would get a rebound effect where you actually all swelled up even more. So I saved it, all day long. I'd breathe through my mouth, and then just before the exam, I would put the drops in, and then I could really think clearly and make a good grade on the exam. But now we know that probably a lot of what happens in the lining of the nose is due to things like contamination in the air, and also mold. If there's mold in your environment, that the nose shuts down. So you have to breathe through your mouth, and then you swallow the mold spores, and the digestive juices can neutralize them, can dissolve them. But if you continue breathing through your nose with mold in the air, that goes in and follows, some experts say, follows tracks through the olfactory nerve into your brain, and can do damage if the mold happens to secrete toxic substances that are damaging. Some molds do and some molds don't. But that's also a complicated subject. But anyway, that's a little bit about the breath. So yes, it's best to do the nose breathing before you, while you're meditating particularly. And then we had a couple more questions.
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, true. And I'll read Jonathan's question. I'm curious about the relationship of fear to the mutations of consciousness. So when he says mutations of consciousness, he's talking about actually the structures of consciousness, which we call the magic. In one language, the Western language, we call it magic, mythical, and mental. And in the writings in India, it's called Vishvanara and Taijasa and Prajna. So we stick with the Western terms because it's a little easier to remember for us. So fear in the mutations of consciousness is a really fascinating question. And he says, I'm witnessing being the driver of my local and national community. Oh, I'm witnessing fear being the driver in my local and national community, which saddens me. Yes, I think everybody's noticing that fear during this pandemic time has been epidemic, a pandemic of fear, actually. I suspect this relates to the mutation of consciousness from mental to integral, that is shifting as we move from the mental structure of consciousness, which is what's current. Then we're trying to move into the coming, incipient, about to happen, new structure of consciousness, which we call the integral. And that's creating lots of distress in the world and resistance and confusion, because the reality that we're used to is kind of melting away. And this new reality, which is really vast improvement, is so different that people are intimidated. And this is all happening largely unconsciously, but it's certainly prevalent. And so Jonathan says, I suspect that a lot of the fear is an indication of the collective resistance to the shift in consciousness. How should we respond to those obsessed with fear? What can this tell us about the evolution of consciousness in the near future? And might we see, and what we might see as it moves on? So that's a lot. That's a huge topic, and great. I love it. I love it. Yeah, fear is actually very much related to the mental structure of consciousness, and that's because which is our current everyday state of consciousness, which is very much mental, very much originally the mental was about logic and the brilliance of logic, but now it's mostly what we call the deficient mental, means the logic is messy and it isn't really logic if you examine it. And so mostly what people feel in this structure of consciousness these days, in this deficient version of the mental, is alienation and separateness. And so we've manifested this thing where everybody's separate, 6 feet apart from everyone, or in an apartment by themselves. And it's sort of like a homeopathic. If you take a homeopathic remedy, people say you get worse before you get better. Well, actually, all the symptoms just become more florid, more dramatic, more intense. And that seeing that and experiencing that prepares you to move through into something really different. So we're in that phase of this exaggeration of our fear. And, you know, it's almost, I think it's an inevitable process, but it is helpful to everyone who's experiencing fear to realize that this is part of a process, and that the fear of, the fear is magnified by isolation and by separateness. And just to give you a little background for this discussion, that the prior structure of consciousness, which we call the mythical structure of consciousness, which is all about the stories, the narratives that guide our lives and that impact every discussion that we have about anything. What are the stories that we tell about what is the world and what is life and who am I? All those stories have a very dominant effect, domineering effect maybe, and are usually unexamined, like we're often not aware of the stories that we organize our lives around. And of course, television and cinema, they play with that all the time, bombarding us with news stories and news stories and news stories. And so we get kind of lost in a soup of stories. But before the advent of these means of this kind of media, there were certain stories that were just kind of implicit in a culture that were really sustain that culture, and also were unexamined as stories. It was just, well, that's the truth, or that's history, or that's that's how the world began, or whatever. And those stories impacted people in a common way, so that everybody pretty much was living from the same stories. So that was the foundation for a kind of agreement, social agreements and assumptions that allowed people to work together and find a sense of commonality. But that's been shattered in the last 50, 75 years, because as communications have improved, people can choose the stories they want to hear. They can choose what they read on in magazines and newspapers, and now on the internet, where they can be totally ignorant of what a lot of other people are reading and only know about what they read. And then, what do they call them? The techniques they use in gathering information from everyone on social media and everywhere else. They send you more of what you already have been looking at, because, that's what he wants. Okay, they give it to you. And so we become more and more focused on our world and the people that share our beliefs and stories, and more alienated from other people's beliefs and stories. And that becomes, that makes commonality and agreements almost impossible. So we came out of this conscious involvement, immersion in the mythical, probably in the Middle Ages. It happened in different places at different times, but in the West, Greece was the emergence of the clear and crystalline logic of the mental in classic Greece. And then that popped up in other places too. And in the East, it had begun already. But the mental, then, each of these structures of consciousness goes through a deterioration gradually, because it no longer is a discovery. It's become, and it gets worn away on the edges and distorted, and gradually becomes a deficient structure. But each of the structures are, and this is important to understand now that we're launching into this discussion, each of the structures are connected at the beginning when they first appear. They are a reconnection with the source or the origin of everything, which we could call the unitary consciousness, or we could call the Great Spirit, or we could call God, or we could call Allah, or you can call it whatever you want to. And believe me, people have lots of different names. But that oneness from which we originally emerged, we wander off and become confused. And then the next structure of consciousness is like a blast of refreshment that reconnects us with the oneness and brings us back into a sort of spiritual coherence and alignment. And so now we're moving from the deficient mental into the integral, which we don't know exactly how to describe because we aren't there yet. And it's totally different from anything that, each of the others was totally different, but this one is very different because the nature of the integral consciousness is that we have awareness of the mythical, the stories, the mental, the logic, and the earliest mutation, which was the magic structure of consciousness, where we were simply one with nature. And so, in the magic structure of consciousness, there was not really any fear, because you and nature, you weren't separate. Nothing could happen to you because you're everything. It's hard for us to grok that, but that was the nature of that awareness. So yes, people died and animals ate them up and they ate other animals, but it was no sense of I am a separate being that could be destroyed. It was like all of this is me. And so fear wasn't really much of a problem there. Then we move into the mythical structure of consciousness, where it's all about the stories. And what that nature of that structure of consciousness was that everything was polar. So, you know, I might be a male, you're a female, but we're just two sides of a pole. So I'm one end and you're the other end. So we're connected. So I'm not isolated. I'm part of this polar connection to everything. I still I have an identity, but that has an identity, and it's all kind of part of me. I'm kind of, so the pole could shift, and I could be on this end, and you on that end. So that was not so isolating. But then when we moved into the logic and the mental, that was when people began to see not as a group. You know, like you look at what they call primitive art, like Grandma Moses. It's like everything's flat, right? Well, the reason everything was flat is because they weren't painting what I see, they were painting what we see. So then at the time of the Renaissance came perspective in art. So suddenly it has depth. Well, the depth in the painting means I'm portraying what I see. It's not what you see or you see. It's what I see. So that's, we could say, oh, we've opened a whole new dimension of depth, of three-dimensional world. But the problem is that now I live with what I see, and I don't know what you see. And I become more alienated from others, and I feel more alone and isolated and separate. And that's when fear can become rampant, because, well, if I'm this separate thing, then I could just be destroyed anytime. And I have no connection that kind of holds me in place. So I'm terrified. So in the deficient mental, which is what we're in, leaving, hopefully, in the deficient mental, we're fear is just rampant. And so that's a long attempt, Jonathan, to try to talk about. Yes, certainly I think it's related to this transition, this emerging mutation of the integral. And so in the integral, we hold the awareness of the mental, the mythical, and the magical, all at the same time. All kind of like, you know, there's this one and this one and this one, and they're all happening right now. And that is almost impossible for us to imagine. But the way you can try to imagine it is, you know, if you've ever used the old-fashioned, I still have one, transparencies that you project on the wall. Well, if you, instead of putting one transparency on and projecting it, somehow you get two or three there, and they're all there together. They're all there at the same time. Well, that's what the integral is like, because we're living in this multidimensional world, and we're already living in a multidimensional world, but we only focus on one dimension at a time. And that's why we go to sleep at night and we forget about this, and then we're in the dream world, taijasa, or the mythical structure of consciousness. And we're there for a while, then we go deeper into deep sleep, and then we're in the magic structure of consciousness, or the prajna. And, and so we experience them separately. Why do we do that? Because the everyday waking consciousness is too narrow. It can't accommodate those others. So we have to live serially in these different structures all through the day, some at night and some during the day. So we're kind of fragmented and basically schizophrenic. So schizophrenia is actually the common existence of humans at this time. It's everybody is schizophrenic in that sense, you know, that they're fragmented. I can't hold all that together, so I do one piece at a time. So I'm a fragmented skitsed out, fragmented, I think the root schizo comes from Greek. I think it means like fragmentation. But anyway, so actually, yeah, the phrenia means the diaphragm. So it's like the split, you know, anyway, the meaning of the term, you know, schizophrenia. And so this is no longer working. So we have to move on, and we have to move into the integral. And what I was starting to say is that the thing about the integral is there is no fear. Fear is impossible. There's nothing to fear because I'm everything and everything is me. And so what can I be afraid of? my teacher used to say, will the right hand cut the left hand off? No, I'm not going to do that. Unless you're really schizoid. But once you become aware that I'm all of this, and you begin to live in that space, then it's quite a revelation. I mean, such a what do I say? Liberation from the fear. We leave fear behind, and God knows we could use that. But if people are afraid of moving into the integral, I'm afraid of moving into fearlessness. That's crazy, but in fact, that's where most of us are. You know, that scares me, the whole thing. Integral, oh my God, I can't do that. I'm terrified because it's fearlessness. So somehow we have to take the plunge, right? But to move ahead and accept that the world is falling apart. The old world is falling apart. Right on schedule. I mean, you know, this is not some tragedy. This is not some disaster. This is not some unexpected disaster. This is an evolutionary process, a mutational process, more correctly. You know, when you mutate from, and you know, you're a tadpole, and suddenly your tail falls off. I mean, my God, that's terrifying. But, you know, now you're a frog and you can hop along and get out of the water. And so you're so much freer. But the metamorphosis is quite intimidating. And so, yes, this, and you know, I don't know what percentage of our population is really aware that this process, this pandemic, is actually involved in a major change in human nature, or how we live on the planet, a total shift in our consciousness. But it sure looks like that to me. And this is what all the scriptures in the East talk about. And this is what all the philosophers, if you put them together in the West, have talked about. This is what the quantum physicists talk about. I mean, it's like, yep, check, check, check. This is predicted and forecast, and in many, all sorts of indigenous cultures around the world. There's some about that in the last chapter of Radical Healing. If anybody ever really gets to the last chapter, then you'll read about that. And so yes, Jonathan, I would say that's true. And so what can we do about it? I think what we can do about it is, first and foremost, be aware of ourselves and what we're doing internally, and allow ourselves to entertain the possibility of living without fear. You know, I mean, okay, maybe even before that, become aware of all the ways in which you're afraid. I mean, there's so many different fears that people have. And if you can just kind of accept, oh, that's where I am right now. Okay. Then you can begin to experiment. Well, what would it be like if I let that fear go? So then I need some kind of different hold on reality, right? A different reality to live in. So can I play with the idea that I am one small part of a great whole? Or as my teacher used to say, I'm a wave, not the ocean, but I am the ocean because I'm a wave on the ocean. And realize that nothing's going to happen to the ocean. And so I can, and this wave arises and it falls and disappears, and then another wave comes, and all of that is me, then what am I going to be afraid of? So unconditional love means freedom from fear. And unconditional love is part of what we dissolve into when the wave subsides. and unconditional love is what we dissolve into. And then we're home. We're home. Thank God I'm home. And then maybe we become another wave, or maybe we don't. And so our individual existence is less important. I mean, it's important because it's what we're working with, but so you do this project and you've completed it, and then what are you going to do? Just sit there and look at it forever? No, I mean, you say, okay, I'm finished with that. Time to move on. So when we get through being this being, we shed that and go to the next thing. So if you can hold on to that perspective, then it really, fear starts sounding kind of silly. And as soon as fear sounds silly, you're free. That's all. Don't take it seriously. I mean, it's an indication of ego. It's an indication of holding on to, I am this identity. And if I lose this identity, then I cease to exist. Well, who's the I? Who is the I? Is the I this body? Or is the I this consciousness, which extends up and connects with every other consciousness? If that's who I am, then how can I cease to exist? But then you see, I am that unitary consciousness. So we were trained in the Western spirituality. It was what do you say? A great sin, and to say, and later became actually a reason to be locked up in a mental ward. If you say, I am God. Oh no, he's delusional. Oh my God, schizophrenic, delusional, lock him away. And the psychiatrists are terrified of crazy people because they know basically that they're crazy too. And they know that, they're afraid that they're going to be pulled into the craziness of the other person. So they have to keep them at arm's length and treat them as it's almost non-human. But actually, that's what the holy men say in India. They don't lock them up. They say, I am God. And you're God. We're all God. That's the truth. So if I am God, because I'm part of the oneness, and I'm emphasizing the whole of it rather than this little individual piece of it, then I'm moving into enlightenment. But that was heresy in the church, and they could burn you at the stake for that. So we didn't encourage that kind of insight or that kind of spiritual connection. In fact, we discouraged it. And the church and governments and so many institutions found that, well, hey, you know, this fear thing, we can use that. That's a way to keep people in line. That's a way to keep them to do, you know, get them to do what you want them to do. Yeah, well, you know, fear is a very useful thing. But I'm here to tell you that stay away from it, you know. It's like, just say no to fear. Yeah. So I don't know, Jonathan, is there more follow-up pieces to that?
No, that was a lot, and thank you. That a lot to think about. Insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sure for some of you that might bring up a lot of questions, and I hope you will ask them now and let us play with that, because it's a marvelous topic.
So this is Rudyji. So is the fifth dimension another way to talk about the integral?
To talk about, and hear the last word.
The integral. The integral.
Well, I think maybe it's just the fourth dimension you're talking about. I mean, our world is three-dimensional in the mental. Next up is four. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to skip that.
So what's the fourth then?
I
thought the fourth is getting to the fifth.
Well, I'm sure it must be in the fifth getting to the sixth, but my God, I can't even begin to think about that. I'm just stuck on, can we just get from this one to the next one? We're getting to the fourth dimension. Yeah.
Well, so what is the fourth dimension then in terms of?
Well, the fourth dimension is the integral, I think.
Oh, okay. And
I think that Gebser says you move from the third dimension to the fourth by adding time. When time becomes part of it, then you a dimension, then that's the fourth dimension. Otherwise, you know, two-dimensional is flat, three-dimensional is depth, and then four-dimensional includes time as another piece of it.
So what does including time mean? Like it?
Well, Gebser says it's, first of all, it's the concretion of time, meaning that we see time as something that we don't live in, but that is this thing that we're using. So we kind of bring it out of unawareness into awareness as an issue. So, you know, that's what the quantum physicists are doing, you know, questioning time. Well, this can happen actually before it already happened, before it's happening. Or they do talk about all these things with time because they're actually studying time, putting it on the table and working with it rather than living in it. And so in the integral structure of consciousness, we become free of time. Yes, Arabella, is our time up?
No. No, but the top of my head is going off, Ravi. So yeah, I'm just exploding. So time. So I think of time as a construct that we have accepted sociologically.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's that aspect of time, but the concretion of time, that feels a little more mysterious to me. That's part one. Part two is Kali.
Uh-huh.
There. I'll mute now and you can talk.
Yeah, well, Kali, of course, is time. Now that's like, what? What is he saying? Kali is time, and she, you know, this is a a goddess in the Indic tradition. But what is a goddess? A goddess is an anthropomorphic form that we accept as a way of understanding something that is ineffable, can't grasp it. And so, in that culture, they made these paintings and pictures and sculptures of this being who is time. Well, if that phenomenon of time came down into a human form, what would it look like? And that's Kali. So that helps us grasp the difficult concepts, or really concepts isn't the right word, the difficult energies or forces in our universe. So Kali is time, and she wears a necklace of skulls and a skirt of human arms. Lovely. So, and she's terrifying, right? She's very scary. Why? Because the heads, of course, she lops them off. She has a sword, she just lops head off. So if you get into your ego too much, and see, now this is all the game of where we're pretending this is a human form or anthropomorphic form, but actually we're talking about some force in the universe, and where we can't quite grasp, so we're making it into look like a person with certain characteristics. So what that lopping the heads off means, that if you're stuck in your ego, well, she's got a solution. Just lop the head off. And so she takes those heads and strings them around her neck and says, I've done that for a lot of people, lopped off their head and helped them get past their ego. Well, so what is the ego? The ego is the idea that I am separate, and I am this and I am that, rather than I am the oneness. And you're trying to get to I am the oneness, but you're stuck in your ego. So with great mercy and love, she chops your head off. And it's like, oh, that solved that. I can't think of myself. I can't, those thoughts can't happen anymore because she took my head off. Now I can relax and be part of the oneness. And so one of the great swords that she uses is time. Because you're, the typical egotistical, especially, I'm going to pick on men because men are generally more egotistical than women in this particular way. So, you're stuck in your ego, and you believe that it's all about me, and there's no other way to get past that than take that ego away, and that's liberating for the person. So how she does that, the sword that she uses is aging. So you're such a hot shot, and you got the whole world under your control, and you're really a big deal, and you made a lot of money, and you're a billionaire. And then guess what? You look in the mirror and suddenly you're just crumbling. Well, that's Kali's sword, time. Take that head off. Suddenly you're just this blubbering old man, And it's like, oh, I get it. Oh, I get it. My idea at 45 of being such a hotshot was kind of silly. And I thought all those things were so important, and having all that money and having those different houses. And it turns out I was wasting my time. And that was just ridiculous. So, yeah, so time is this great sword. Take that head off with it. And so, we shouldn't be afraid of Kali. We should be grateful. Thank you for removing that obstacle. And she does it all out of love. So what we're saying is that this force in the universe, that's called time, is part of the creation of the whole universe by the oneness. And one of the ways what it provides us is this way to get past our ego that's getting old and decrepit and dying. And that's love. That's the unconditional love and universal love. And love you enough to chop your head off. My child, Kali's child. We're all Kali's children. So, Linda, does that help at all? Yeah, time. So see, we're getting time out there where we can talk about it and look at it and ask what it is. And then as we move into the integral, time becomes one gear. If I want to kind of do the mental gear, there'll be time. If I want to do the magic gear, there's no time. If I want to just do the integral gear, then maybe a little time, maybe no time. I don't know whether I want time. So it becomes this thing that's out there that we can use or not use or dispense with or bring it back or whatever, instead of this thing that we live in. We live in it and we're so obsessed with it. We're all crazy, like, I have no time, I have no time, I have no time. Like the Mad Hatter, remember the Mad Hatter? He was running around, I have no time, I have no time. Well, that was Lewis Carroll's brilliant depiction of the deficient mental. I have no time, I have no time. Well, yeah, because you're in the mental and time dominates the mental, but it's not out there to look at. It's, you live in it. So that's the problem with the mental. We are immersed in time. We have no time freedom. We can't escape time. So in the integral, we step out of that. So the mental is just one way, one gear to function in. And then we have time freedom. So we'll be free of time if you want. Or if you want to go back and do some time stuff. So I used to tell my kids when they were young, see, when you get to be older, you're going to have to, you want to go on vacation, you have to decide not only what country you want to go to, but what year. Maybe you want to go there in 200 AD. So it's going to be a lot more complicated to plan your vacations. And they went, oh, God, Dad, you make it sound oh, I don't know that they've ever recovered from that. But they shouldn't. Yeah, it may be true.
What about the concretized?
Well, the concretized means putting it out so it's the thing you can look at it. That makes it concrete instead of abstract. Does that make sense? I mean, this sounds like abstract, but if we're going to move out of time or beyond time or have time freedom, it has to become concrete so that, and that's what Picasso did in his paintings. That they would have the facial feature and then you would have a nose over here going this way, and and he was showing what you usually see in a sequence as you walk around an object. It was all there at once. So he collapsed time onto the canvas and people were outraged. They were furious. That's horrible. That's so, it really, just like now, we're so freaked out by the coming of the integral. And that was one of the first little suggestions of it in the art world. And they were just like, oh, outraged. You call that art? That's terrible. That's ugly. That's disgusting. Because it's really destroying your current reality. It's playing with one of the sacred pieces that aren't to be questioned, time, linear time. Linear time. Linear time goes from here to there. And from there, where does it go? Beyond. So how far does it go? Well, it goes on indefinitely. And then what happens beyond that? Well, I don't know. Well, we don't talk about that. Well, that's why physics, the old physics, is obsolete now, because, you know, time is it's showing up its deficiencies as a concept. Yes, Arabella.
And then when we meditate, right, we kind of enter a place where time doesn't have a whole lot of meaning. It's almost as though we've entered into folds of time.
Well, because what is meditation but the process of learning to enter the integral?
Yeah.
You know, that's what it is. Just like most spiritual traditions, at least the mystical spirit, even mystical Christianity, was really about entering the integral. So it's, of course, yes, we move beyond that, or we move, it's not quite correct to say beyond it, because we're no longer confined by it. That's the thing. We don't want to be confined by time.
Yeah, time becomes transparent.
Yeah. So, you know, okay, yeah, I see time, but if I look back there, oh, there's no time there. The mythical structure of consciousness was a period where time existed in a different form. It was cyclical time. So, you know, there were seasons, but they kept happening. And then there were dynasties, and so there was not linear time. There was no concept of linear time until they started putting up clocks in the squares, and then moved into the mental with all of its splits. See, the mental sort of cuts things into pieces. It's analytical. So we cut everything into pieces to find out how it works. But the time was one of those things that got cut from the whole. And then it's this linear idea of a linear thing that just goes on and on. And then, well, what happens on the end of it? Well, so see that the whole paradigm collapses. So we are beginning to understand the limits of our science and our logic and so forth. And that's great. So, well, that took us into some interesting directions. When was it? 5 after 8. Any other? I mean, I know I see a lot of kind of stunned faces, and I know that's a lot to digest, but it's okay.
Swamiji, I have a question on time. Does time exist beyond Earth? Because we operate in a construct of gravity and time. That's how particle physics, I mean, now we had the Higgs boson discovery of the atom in 2012. And I mean, particle physics as such has discovered all the atoms which a matter can be composed of within the Earth. But let's say if you're an astronaut, you go to the space, you come in contact with dark matter, it doesn't matter to human beings. It just goes through it. There is no connection, meaning between human bodies and what's out in space. So my question is, when it comes to consciousness, are we talking in the sphere of Earth in terms of what we experience?
Well, I think, you know, different physicists have different ideas about what's limited to this space or that space. But when we talk about integral consciousness, we're really talking about something that is universal. Or as my Swami Ravi used to say, beyond time, space, and causality. So then the difference between one planet and another, or on Earth or not on Earth, becomes irrelevant, because it's universal. It's beyond this space. It's not, space is not a limiting factor, nor time, nor causality. So the mental is built on those, time, space, and causality. And if you try to take those away, the mental sort of evaporates. But we're going beyond the mental, or we're going more inclusive than the mental. And so time, space, and causality are properties of the mental structure of consciousness. And that's just one structure. And we already live in more than one structure. I want to keep emphasizing that at night we go into other structures of consciousness. What the great challenge of the moment is, can we maintain a thread of consciousness that runs through all of them, rather than splitting them apart, so that we never have the joy of a full awareness. And that's what meditation is designed to do. It's designed to lead you into the integral, to lead you into a help you develop that thread of continuity that runs through these different structures. So as you practice meditation, you begin to notice that, oh, I'm sitting there, and then all of a sudden I'm seeing these faces and images, and I go, oh, it's like a dream. Oh yeah, okay, well, I'm sliding into or through the mythical structure of consciousness, taijasa. And then if we can hang in there and not fall asleep, which means not shut it down and keep it separate, but stay aware, then we can find that we're dropping into the magic structure of consciousness, where there's no imagery, there's just maybe some light or flow of movement, or a flow of prana energy, whatever. And then I'm just one with everything. So if I can hold that thread as I go deeper into meditation, then I am developing the capacity to be in the integral. And this is the time-honored methodology. You know, all the great spiritual teachers did this. And many of them, quote, became enlightened, means they entered the integral structure of consciousness. But that was so different that most other people went, well, they either locked them up or, you know, worshipped them. Like, okay, you're some special thing, or you're crazy. But they couldn't deal with it. But now this is where, you know, it's not just 1 or 2 or 4 or 6 or 10 people moving into the integral structure of consciousness. The whole world is doing that. And so this is a mammoth kind of transition on the planet, transmutation of this new structure of consciousness that we're all part of. And so that's kind of amazing. and so, you know, we have the pandemic. It's like the whole planet, but the whole planet is going through this separation, fear, the whole thing of, especially it's a fear, it's a paroxysm of fear. Because as Jonathan suggested, because we all are terrified because something's happening and our reality is falling apart. Yes, it is, because we're moving into a different reality. And the old one will still be there. But as long as you're confined to it and holding on to it, you can't go into the new one. And we need to all participate in this. I mean, it's for everyone's benefit and joy and delight to move into the integral consciousness. but we get hung up on looking at, well, what will I lose? But I'm going to lose this. I'm going to lose my, what about all my investments? So kiss them goodbye, wish them well. Your investment was doing meditation. That was the one that counts, because now you're learning how to move. It's fear, holding on to the past, holding on to material things, like people clutch to a piece of straw in the water when they're drowning. Oh my God, we got to hold on. But don't hold on, just let go. It'll be an interesting ride. And when you get there, you'll wonder, why did I resist that so much? I mean, I'm remembering my one of my sons is just started a residency in psychiatry, and he wanted to do it. And then when time came to do it, he was like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But, his sister said, you ruin your career if you don't just show up. You got to show up there and do it. And so somebody found this video of a dog that a couple people were trying to throw in a swimming pool, and the dog didn't want to go, and he was struggling and fighting. And finally they pushed him hard enough and he went in, and then he was swimming around like this, like, oh, I'm swimming in the pool. But he was terrified. So they told my son, see, you just jump in. And now he's in and he's swimming around, loving it. But we're all like that, we don't want, oh my God, the unknown. I can't jump into the unknown. No, 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 no. And then we get in, it's like, oh, this is so nice. So, relax. Nothing horrible is trying to happen. Really good things are trying to happen. If you just relax, release, let go of the old, let go all your more materialistic clutching to things, and be free. And Gerald thinks that we've run out of time. I thought we were beyond time. I mean, what do you mean we run out of time? Arabella, what do you think? Have we run out of time? Yeah.
It all depends on if you have more to say, Ravi.
Well, I don't have anything more to say. That's it. I have to say, relax, enjoy, meditate, be grateful, live fearlessly. It's your birthright to live fearlessly. And I'm so glad you're all here. And it was much fun. And please come back. And Gerald will tell you more about what's happening when.
Wow. Glad we recorded that. That was quite a session. Thank you for the questions, everyone. And look for our announcement for next week. We do have a training going on next week, and we're hoping that we can adjust our schedule to allow this to continue for next week. So just watch for the announcement, and more than likely we will have our Sunday evening session.
Yeah, we will.
So, and it will be a meditation next week. So please unmute and say goodnight and share gratitude.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Night.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night, Rudyji. Good night, Carol.
Good night,
Night,
Arabella. Thank
Linda,
you.
Jonathan,
Good night,
George,
Arabella,
Julie.
Julie, Carol, Swami Ravi, Arabella. Bye-bye.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Much love.
Yes.
Thank you all.